I would perceive it as kind of enriching your life experience rather than, oh, I have to change. Change is not comfortable, but if you get this a bit of like growth mindset, a bit of being like in the flow and seeing what lives brings you, you might find some gems like on the way.
Hello, stereotype breakers, and welcome to yet another episode of the Meaningful Conversations podcast. Today's topic is moving countries for work. I'm very curious if you've ever done it or thought about it. What has your experience been personally? My experience has been living in 5 different countries. The guest who I'm interviewing on the topic today has lived in 7 different countries. And so she knows a thing or two about immigration and how to approach that topic. So let me introduce our guest today, Alina Verbenchuk. Alina has lived and worked in 7 different countries in both big tech companies like Google and also startups in education and recruitment. She moved from business to tech and helped other people do that. If you're curious to learn more about Alina's experience or ask her about international careers in tech, make sure you follow her channel, which I will leave a link to in the description. You know, you can always use the comments, etc. But basically, Alina and I have worked in YouTube, and so YouTube is the most perfect way to talk to us. And it's just, I don't know, whenever I think of Alina, I mean, obviously I think of YouTube because she still does work there. And that's where we met. We sat across the desks from each other. My desk was here and her desk was here. All right, without a further ado, let's dive into our conversation with Alina on the topic of immigration, changing countries to go and work for a company in that different country. Hi, Alina. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited for our conversation because out of all people, you know so much about moving, to different countries. And I've seen you do so many talks on the subject. So you're truly an expert. You know so much because not only have you experienced it yourself, but also you have helped so many other people do the same thing and go through the same process. So let's jump straight in. I have a question about that general process. Could you walk us through the typical process of moving to a different country for work from, like the general steps from looking for a
Mhm.
job to settling into a new place?
That's a really good question. So even before we start talking about move on its own, I would even take a step back and start with questions like a method that probably a lot of people know called 5 whys, like asking yourself 5 whys about your journey, about your immigration, why do you really want to immigrate? Because when you already start thinking about the reasons, you already find out a lot of interesting deal breakers for you, a lot of interesting things that will be important in the process that you're ready to negotiate, or vice versa, you're not ready to negotiate. I think that's the most important step. It's like basically value educate like it's an exercise about your values and important like things that you want to have in your journey. Then as soon as you figured out, okay, so here are the things that I want to gain with this move, because nobody really wants to move if you're going to lose something, right? So if it really adds value to your life, adds value to your career, go ahead and start the process. So while you were answering those questions, why do you want to move? Maybe you want to move, I don't know, because you want more career opportunities, or you want to live in a better climate. You already have those clues about how and where to start the process. So some people will start with a country. This country is my priority, and I will build my strategy around a particular country or around a particular language. So it will be location based. For other people, it will be, oh, I'm actually building my strategy around a particular company. Say I'm moving to, I don't know, one of big tech companies, and I'm thinking of being there, and that's how I'm going to move. And maybe location is not that critical. So you're ready to move in this region, but in different offices, and that's fine with you. So it's not a deal breaker where you go, but the company is a deal breaker. Option 3, your deal breaker can be a role. So you want to be for example, you want to be a product manager. You don't want to be in business. You don't want to be in tech. You want to be in between. And this is a critical thing that it should be there. So your step number 2 will depend on how you did your first exercise on 5 whys. And then again, a process would probably look very similar to many people. You look for jobs, first of all. And before you start looking for jobs, there's also a very important step that's called CV. You need to write your CV. You need to look for jobs. You need to go through the interviews. You need to get an offer. Potentially, you will need to negotiate your offer. And then you will have a very exciting process of moving, connected with a lot of bureaucracy. Yeah, visas or any permits if you need one, and then you can settle down. I mean, there are plenty of important details and milestones that you need to go through on every stage. We can talk about them later, but on a high level, everybody would probably need a CV or some kind of application if they are, even if they are like rock stars and superstars in the industry, they would still need some proofs. So anyway, I think that's the process on the high level.
I love how you break it down into, the different things that you strategize around. So let's say that a person has strategized around something already, and now the next step is to strategize around the visa, because the work visa is a big hurdle for a lot of us to jump through. You and I have jumped through
Yeah.
through it multiple times, and it's yeah, it's a whole process. So, how do you have any tips on how to strategize around getting a work visa? How to search for a job that will sponsor you for a work visa? Or, let's say that somebody is country agnostic, they want to strategize around a role. How do you select a better country that's like easier, not a better country, but a country where it will be easier to get a work visa, essentially?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's no one size fits all answer. It will depend a lot on what role you're applying for and which company what company you're targeting. Let's break it down this way. So, for example, if you're applying for a big company, that's an easiest option. It's not even about the country; it's about the type of company, because multinational corporations like big tech, they can bring you whenever they need you. They can bring you to the US, to Europe. Again, to the US is maybe slightly more difficult, but they can bring you to different offices. And then also big startups or successful startups on a late stage of financing, or like maybe startups that already like companies that already became public. They also have a lot of kind of capabilities or resources to bring you from one location to another. So if you're targeting those companies, I think that's the easiest option. I would even give my personal example. So when I was moving, I was thinking of working for a startup, but none of the startups I applied to were sponsoring visas. So this option was closed for me very, very quickly. And that's how I started strategizing around companies. I even didn't strategize that much around the role. I was flexible because I was business graduate. I'm like, okay, whatever, like role is not that important for me probably, but this opportunity to move was more important for me. So that's how it worked for me. But I know that many people are strategizing around different things. So another option is if you have a critical skill, and this is a great opportunity to move. And critical skill might be manifested in different ways. It might be like a critical skill. It can be a language. For example, you speak a particular language, and yeah, you move to a country where you need to work in this language. Or you can have, I don't know, you might have PhD or a particular degree that is very extremely rare in a country. And for example, Germany has a lot of opportunities to like prove that you have particular skill or degree, and that's considered like a critical skill to move. There's also an option of so-called like talent visas or exceptional talent visas, or like US has this O1 visa, UK has global talent visa. So it's also about critical skill. So in that case, you can be company agnostic, role agnostic. you really can rely on the country in that case. So this is option number three. And you just need to work most, like usually you work with lawyers, usually you collect you make a case about yourself, and you apply. But here you can rely on the country, and you don't have to strategize around other things, which in the future might actually be better because you're a free person in a new country. You don't have to be linked to a particular company or industry or language. That's in short.
That's a very good point. I mean, when you do apply for a work visa, you are attached to that employer in most countries, in most cases, right? Unless it's one of those talent visas, in which case you can much easier switch employers. But when you are attached to an employer, you can generally, again, this is a huge generalization, but from my experience, you can only move through the company, right? Like you can, like to get promoted, you can, if you get promoted or if you switch positions internally, that's how you move. That's how you change, but you are attached. And I know that some countries have like some restrictions on how soon you can apply for another work visa after you've left that one. So that's just something to be aware of. At least that's what I've heard. But the language thing that you mentioned, that was my experience as well. I was hired at Google in the UK because Russian was a non EU language. And so that basically opened up the door for me as someone who possesses that skill to have it easier. The company basically, in a lot of cases, have to prove to the government that they have to hire someone outside of the country for this particular role because it's harder to find those skills in the country. And that is why you have to make that unique case, right? Because I was also looking for roles in Dublin because I figured out that in Ireland at the time when I was looking, so don't quote me on this right now, but at the time it was easier to get a role if it needed a language that was non-EU because EU people could move freely. But yeah, it's a very good point to look out for. And one more thing, sorry, I just wanted to add something from personal experience, at least with the US, because the US is harder, or at least at the time when I was applying for an H-1B, which is the work visa here, because they have this lottery process. And whenever employers, even big tech companies, they have to get into this lottery process. And so you might have all the paperwork, you might have your case built up, but you just don't win the lottery, and so you have to wait for the next round of lottery. It's like it's very complicated. I don't understand, and maybe they've changed it by now, but I went with a university, and that organization was considered outside of the lottery. I don't remember what it was exactly that like that process, that visa entailed, but I went outside of the lottery. So that's just like something also to look out for.
Yeah, that's an amazing example because yeah, US is like a standalone immigration, I don't know how to call it, quest. So it's really, US is quite hard. It was hard, it is still hard. So not many things changed from what I know. Like I would say not many things improved. If anything,
Mm.
like things might go worse, might go slightly worse maybe, but not that they improved significantly. But anyway, people still immigrate, people still manage to find jobs. And another option with the US that many people use as a life hack is to start working somewhere else, say in
Hmm.
Europe. Again, example of big tech companies, you start working in Europe, and then in a year you move to the US when it's possible, and you already have this L1 visa where you don't need to participate in the lottery, but you still you need to prove that you are like manager, executive, or you have again critical skill, and your critical skill might be engineering, might be, I don't know, data science, might be language, but anything again that company can prove to the government that they cannot find this person in the country.
It's so interesting how that happens. So let's switch to the offer part. So let's say that you have found a role, you have interviewed for the role, and now you have an offer on the table. What should people keep in mind when evaluating these types of offer, abroad before they move? Are there any hidden surprises or anything else that they should keep in mind regarding this potential offer, this opportunity that they should look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are quantitative things and qualitative things. So usually when you have an offer, it's mostly like quantitative. You see the number and on the in the offer. And first step that you can do is do basic Google search, Google research with the websites like Numbeo, if I'm not mistaken, and a couple of other websites that show you cost of living and show your cost of living for, say, one person, family of two, family of three, four, depending on whether you move with someone or alone. It's also important. So you can start with your basic research. And from there, you already can start understanding, okay, is this enough? Is this not enough? And most important, one like step zero, even before doing Numbeo, you go to Google again and you search tax calculator for a particular location, country, or state, and you see what's going to be your monthly salary or weekly, or depending on how you measure it. Usually people think of monthly salaries. What's going to be your monthly salary after tax? So this is your take home pay, and this is how much you're gonna have. And then I would say typically, again, it depends a lot. People have different, I would say, living standards and like they want different quality of life. Usually the biggest part of your spending goes on rent. If you just move to another country and you didn't buy your property, so you have to rent. Usually it's the biggest chunk of money you give on that. It can be some, I would say, top range that I've seen, like people give out 50% of their salaries, which I consider to be quite a lot. But like 20, 30 is more in the like typical range, and people are like, okay, that's good enough. Then you calculate, okay, how much can I afford to spend on my rent? Go on property renting websites, search for real estate, look for places to rent, look what you can afford in which locations, how it's going to look, and start thinking, okay, this is going to be my approximate standard of living. Usually flat and like rent is the most important thing that people kind of start their research from. Then obviously groceries, food, and part two, also if you move in as a family, super important to think about your dependents, especially education for kids, especially whether your partner will be able to work in that location or not, because some visas restrict that. Some visas, vice versa. It's very funny. In some locations, like you are chained to your employer, and your partner is not chained at all. Like they can do whatever they want, which is great. In some cases, vice versa, partners cannot work, which is really, yeah, might be difficult for a family. Another thing that I would consider is to speak to people who already moved, who you know, and this will be like qualitative part, your qualitative research. Okay, so what's your firsthand experience of living in that particular location? How's it with I don't know, with schools or like education, and how's it with like social life? Is it okay if I move, I don't have any friends there? Because some locations there, for example, quite like, I would say, big cities like, I don't know, London, New York, they have quite a lively social life, events. Everything is just, um, you can move alone, and you won't be alone. Like in 6 months, you probably will have friends and some acquaintances and some communities to go to. And there are some other locations, quieter ones, where life is more kind of residential. People have families, they live like their own lives in their own houses. People do not really kind of network that much. Think about that. Think about how you're going to settle in, and how you're going to grow. Say you're moving for a job, and then to grow in a role, you probably would need to network. You probably would want to change your role at some point. So think about that. If you move into like location where there's only one company that employs everyone, maybe that's not the best option in terms of flexibility, because what if you would want to change your role in, say, a couple of years? What are you going to do? So maybe it's not worth it. Yeah, that's my thoughts. I don't know. What is your experience?
Honestly, the point about the partner and if you're moving with a partner and their visa situation and considering that, that is so important. I had one here in the US when I arrived. One of my colleagues, his wife, and again, like you have to understand like what countries recognize as an official partner, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you have to be married officially, etc. And like how do you file that stuff? So one of my colleagues here, his wife couldn't work and she was going insane apparently, because I mean, of course you take her out of a situation where she's been working and had a life, and all of a sudden she has no friends, no social life, because she has it's hard as an adult, especially because they had a child, young child. It's hard to make friends if you don't have that work situation. And especially now that a lot of roles, even though they're in a different location, they can still be remote, which is insane. But I know of some of those cases where people work for tech companies and they live 5 minutes walk a 5 minutes walk away from the office, and they work from their home. And so it's very hard to make friends, it's very hard to find community. I Yeah, like all of those things are very important to consider. And I want to dig deeper into the, doing your research, doing the market research on the salary. How do you have any tips on how to determine what's a good market rate? Because your market rate will not only depend on the cost of living in the country, which is also very important to research, but also it's just, benchmarking against what your skill set is valued at in that market. Do you have any tips on how to do that, how to structure that research along with the cost of living research as well?
Yeah, I only mentioned the costs. I absolutely forgot about the income and how to benchmark. So, yeah, absolutely. And especially if you are an experienced professional, that's really important. I remember myself moving as a like graduate or just like junior specialist. I didn't really have many leverages to negotiate, but as you grow in your career, you have more and more opportunities to negotiate and raise your pay. But before you even think of, okay, should I ask for more? Is it like a good offer? So you can start your market research with websites like Glassdoor. From my own experience, Glassdoor is slightly skewed sometimes, and I can't even tell which side is like, is it lower, is it bigger? Because I don't understand how they calculate the pay, whether they just take in the base salary, whether they apply like they are calculating bonuses, stocks. In tech roles, bonus and stock are super important. It can be up to, I don't know, 40% of your annual pay, or sometimes even more depending on your level. So, what I would think of, especially if you're in tech, I would go to the website called levels.fyi. They usually have the latest data on salaries. They don't have a lot of data for, say, Europe, but for the US, the data is pretty, I would say, good. As I said in the very beginning, apply tax calculator, use your tax calculator, because it might seem as an extremely high pay. But then when you deduct taxes and you see the cost of living, you actually understand that that's like, it's not bare minimum, but it's like good enough, but not like wow for, say, a family of a couple of people. But anyway, so I would use Glassdoor, I would use levels.fyi. I would try to Google particular recruiters or particular articles for a particular location. Last but not least, I would speak with people who moved, and I would just ask them whether it's considered a good salary, bad salary, and so on. Because what is considered to be a huge salary in one country might be like just bare minimum in the other country. As I said, like, say, California, from the other country you think, oh my god, this is just huge, but then taxes, cost of living, some other hidden costs that you can think of now. So yeah, one more thing I think, also think about. So stocks and bonuses are important. Funny enough, I've heard enough, like I've read a lot of articles recently about how some tech giants redesigning their kind of recalculating their pay as well, because usually tech stocks in the past, say, 5 years, they were growing as crazy. Now they're not good. Now they some of the stocks dropped, especially in the beginning of the year, in the like recently, and some of the fangs are just like raising the base salary and kind of adjusting. So think about that. Think if you're moving, say, for a startup job, same. You might ask for actually higher base salary because you don't know what's going to be with how your stock's going to look like in the end of the day. Though in the beginning it might be like, oh wow, great, but you should be, I would say, sure that if you seriously like rely on your stocks, you should be sure that you're gonna this company is gonna fly and skyrocket. Also, as I said, find people who you can speak to. Also, there are sometimes communities. It might be like anonymous communities or communities that are like people already living there and have their forums, chats. You can just like write in and say, hey guys, how would you think about this offer, and they might tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about for people who are moving to a new country where they don't know anyone personally who has moved there. Like, how do you find those expats, right? Potentially from your same country that, understand what it's like back home and can tell you for sure. I'm sure there are a lot of communities out there that people can tap into if they don't know anyone personally who has moved, to ask them for their like recommendation.
Facebook is a good place to start, but again, it depends on, like, say for for Russian speakers, Facebook is like the place where we hang out, and there might be communities, events, and so on. But for the other countries as well, like you might find things on Facebook, on I don't know, kind of if you move to a company and you already moved, usually you start with your company, and that's where you start building your community from. You make friends with a couple of people, and then you go to one event, another event, especially while you're, say, junior, and I would assume younger, like right after the university. It's easier in terms of parties, in terms of just socializing. People are doing a lot of stuff, hanging out on the weekends and doing some weekend and trips together. So obviously, well, when you're already in the country, it becomes easier. And what I noticed recently, and especially after COVID, like people started moving around so much. If you think about it, I don't know about you, and maybe for some people it might be difficult, but like when I think about any location in the world, I think I might find a couple of like some people there. And I was recently thinking of traveling somewhere, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I probably can find people anywhere to ask about how they live, or at least they, I don't know, did some, as they call, digital nomad, nomading for a couple of months. So yeah, it is possible, though. I don't know, what was your experience? So you started with university when you moved to the US?
Yeah, I worked at a university.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
worked at a university here when I moved to the US. And luckily, my husband, then boyfriend, lived here, so I knew what I was getting into. What you were talking about with digital nomad stuff, like that is such great research if somebody is trying to move to a different country and they are in the position where they can work remotely and can visit that country as well. Like now I am very much aware, we spent so much time in Chile. uh I'm very much aware about potential hidden costs of living in Chile, like just from being a digital nomad. And like you can find communities if you really want to, and really ask people who pay social security and all those things that you don't necessarily see as a digital nomad, because of course like it's still too like not deep enough of a investigation. But it's a very interesting approach to doing your research as well.
Yeah, I would say even more. So I have someone, like a friend of mine. She just recently traveled to Thailand with her husband, again for a couple of months to do like I would say digital nomad experience. And in a couple of weeks, they organized a meetup. They just made a meetup, posted on Facebook, posted it somewhere in some groups. I don't know, like asked people in the location, okay, how, like what's the place where people hang out, like in digital world. And somehow the first meetup, they only brought together something like 5 people. But next meetup, it was already 20. And then I'm sure they will bring more. So it's like a snowball. Obviously, first tries always might be awkward. It might be like very difficult. And from what I remember, I lived in Hong Kong for some time. Somehow I found out about this Russian business speaking society or like community. I don't remember. And I just crashed their party. I was like, okay, can I come in? Yes. The only reason why I went there is because I speak the language. But like I started connecting to people, I started finding out about their stories, and they're like, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that. And for all expats, it's important to connect. Now that I live in London, I'm thinking, okay, I probably also want to organize a meetup slash party to just like make people meet each other. And after COVID, we didn't have any events, drinks for a while, for 2 years. So I think it's super important.
100%, 100%. Finding your community is super, super important. And I have a question on acclimating to the place I want to ask you later. But now, before we go further into that topic, the question of taxes came out a lot, and you have mentioned tax calculators, which is like such a great insight into doing your research on what the standard your pay will actually be, etc. What are the tax implications, generally speaking? Because of course it will depend on the country. I just want to like put a disclaimer out there, it will depend on the country. But what are some of the tax implications of moving to a different country? Are you treated differently as a foreigner? Will the company help you pay taxes or file your taxes? What has been your general experience on that?
That's a really good question, and I'm afraid I cannot give good advice, like proper advice, because again, it will depend on the country, and I lived only in X amount of countries, but not in all of them. And disclaimer, not a financial advice. So I would say if you move with a company, usually if it's a big company, usually they take care of taxes, and some like usually you don't need to think about it that much, and they take care of that. Or they provide services, or they direct you to services where you can find tax advisor and do something about it. Another thing, like if you move as a, say, digital nomad or some like individually, that's a completely different story. And for that, I would recommend to check with tax advisors before you move. And there might be so many implications, like so many, starting with your base salary, then your stocks, your bonuses. Some countries have this dual tax responsibilities that you need to pay, like in both countries, which is crazy. So you need to know when the tax year starts and ends in which country, then what is considered to be like taxable events, so to say. Then property sometimes is important. So if you're, for example, own a property in one location, you move to the other location, sometimes you might need to pay property tax in the other location, or some kind of tax. Or say if you want to buy your second property, you will have to do something. Stocks is a completely different story as well. Stocks are super nuanced from my experience. It's like, okay, if your stocks vested in one country, then you sell them in the same country. It's one story. If it's vested in one country, you sell it in a different country. There is also a scenario that you kind of move through another country. Like it's crazy. So I would definitely speak to someone like a tax advisor. There are plenty of, like I would say, the high-end consultants like PwC and like Big Four. Those guys obviously might be the best in those questions, but there are plenty of services and firms that can assist you on that.
Exactly. And in my experience, there are individuals that focus on, like a connection of specific countries. So, for example,
Yeah.
I had, and this is like business tax we're talking about, but this lady also could do personal tax. This lady was specializing in UK customers dealing with the US. So it's
Mm.
like she knows what's that intersection of those two countries
Yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah,
tax
yeah.
implications of
It's
them.
very nuanced, very specific. So really, it's something that's not transferable across borders, unfortunately.
100%. What else do you wish you knew about the experience of moving to a new country and the things that it entails when you move for work that you wish you knew before you moved?
Oh, very good question. I think my move personally was quite comfortable, so I cannot complain that I didn't know something that was critical. I think what I didn't know, I would break it down into okay, work stuff. I think work culture is different in every country, so I would take that into account. And I only heard, for example, okay, Europe is quite different from, say, I don't know, I only worked like in Russia, for example. Okay, what different in what sense? But then I only felt it when I moved and when I started talking to people, and say growing in the company might be different in a way that you might rely more on your social skills or your soft skills rather than your hard skills. So I think that's important. So work culture might differ from country to country, but at the same time it's also might be different from company to company. So it's not like my case was unique. And obviously you can ask again, the best advice is to ask people who already moved. But even they, depending what the company is, like multinational, very diverse, it might be one culture. But if say it's very monocultural, that might be completely different experience in exactly the same country. So not that you can 100% know it in advance. I would say one thing that might be transferable for any move and for any person that is moving is, again, social stuff. And what I learned during, I would say, my first 2, 3 years, maybe, when I moved to London in particular, because I've been living here like the longest time, is that your social life would not organize itself. So you need to make an effort, because it's not your home country, and it's not like new social contacts and inflow of people will find you. You need to get out and get out of your house and meet new people and overcome your introverted tendencies and like, yeah, your traits of like sitting at home with a book. Obviously sitting at home with a book is great and it's enjoyable, and you will learn a lot, but you will learn more from people outside of your house, and you need to make an effort. So for me, especially, I was super social when I was in Russia. I participated in so many like student communities, in so many communities around career and so on, that I had just people reaching out to me themselves. It didn't happen here, and opportunities did not find me on its own. And yeah, that's the thing that you should accept, that you will have to start everything from scratch, and you will have to get yourself out of your house, and yeah, not to sit on your sofa but look for people and contacts. Yeah.
That is the perfect transition for my final question, which is what are your recommendations on, acclimating to this new place and finding that community? How do you make it your new home?
Great question. So when I was in the US and I was doing like short assignment there, I remember I moved from London to San Francisco, and I was like, oh my God, like it's so different. And I was looking for things that I had in London. So I think first thing that you need to accept is that new location is not, you will not have the same things in your new location, and that is fine. So you should stop kind of comparing and saying, oh, but in my previous location, it was so much better. Yes, maybe it was, but here you might find new things that might be much, much better. For example, in San Francisco, I was just enjoying the nature so much, and I don't enjoy nature here in London. I don't enjoy the weather, and I was like, okay, it's just different. So number one, it's just different. It's a big change, but don't perceive everything like in black or white. It's not black or white. It's like tons of different colors. Second, don't try to bring, as a result of the first one, don't try to bring your lifestyle to a new location exactly as it was before, because your lifestyle was, I don't know, like if you lived in a big city, you love to, I don't know, grab a cup of coffee and just work from like a working space or something like this. And now it might have changed and you have like a long commute and this and that. Just like redesign your lifestyle, and you might find new great things, new time that you can find in your day to do work or to meet new people and so on. Third, and I already mentioned it, try to know new people. And again, culture might be completely different. You probably know, say, small talk is not a very common thing in Eastern European countries, but try to find advantages of having small talk, and at some point you will start to enjoy small talk, and when you come home you will be like, oh, you just start talking about personal stuff right away. How do you even do that? So some of those things, first of all, I would perceive it as kind of enriching your life experience rather than, oh, I have to change. Change is not comfortable and it's not what we want, and especially the older we become, the harder it gets to change. But if you get this a bit of like growth mindset, a bit of being like in the flow and seeing what life is bringing, like will bring you, you might find some gems like on the way, some great people, great events, great opportunities. It will come to you. And number four, be patient, because again, you've been living in your country for X years, and here you want to have exactly the same lifestyle, community, and I would say environment in 1 year. It's just impossible. It's impossible and it's normal. So it takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Oh, 100%. And I love your recommendation about mindset, about, not resisting this change, but kind of, I see it as a
Embracing
little
it.
river. Yeah, like
Yeah.
laying down in that river and going with the flow, because you changed environments for some type of reason. Embrace it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alina. This has been so
Thanks for
incredibly
having me.
insightful. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, because I source these questions from my audience, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard some, like a response to their question. I can't wait for them to hear those answers and for them to make the decision and for them to change their lives and go outside of their comfort zone and reinvent themselves, because it's all about that essentially.
Yeah, and last but not least, it just like came to me today. I think whatever decision you make, it's your decision, and it's going to be great because you're going to gain new experience. And I don't know anyone who said, "Oh, I like it wasn't worth it." Sometimes people came back, but it still was worth it. So absolutely go for it. Think for yourself. Don't listen to anybody else, and make a decision.
Alina, thank you so much. I love your strategic approach to this topic. And I mean, you can see that you've done it a few times already, and you have so much knowledge and so much experience in the topic. And you've helped so many people also move into different countries for work and specifically in the tech field. Thank you so much for your insights and advice to everybody. It's super helpful. I'm sure that a lot of people will take so many things from this conversation and we'll be able to strategize around what is important to them. Now, if you want to follow Alina and her journey, and if you want to get in touch with her, or if you have follow up questions, I will leave a link to her YouTube channel in the description and other social media as well. So make sure you go ahead and follow her there, because yeah, she's there, and sometimes we keep in touch through social media, and sometimes her face pops up on my YouTube, but in the YouTube studio, and it's always very nice and like brings back really good memories. Let me know what you thought about this conversation, if you've learned something new and what it was, and if you have experience living in different countries as well, if you found our conversation similar, or the things that we have discussed similar to your experience in the topic, because everybody's experience can be unique, but then at the same time there's so many recurring issues and things. So yeah, and if you have anything else to add to what we have discussed, please go ahead, please be my guest. We would love to hear from you, because we're all contributors to this topic, right? And everything is just so personal. So, super curious to find out what your experience has been with moving to different countries for work. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on YouTube and on the podcasting platform of your choice. We should be everywhere. So, yeah, just subscribe, leave us a review. Thank you. That means a lot because algorithm, and you're supporting this channel, this podcast, by doing that. We can also be friends on other social media. You can find us as Stereotype Breakers. And I hope you have a wonderful time today you're currently experiencing. Bye.